Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Now, we've heard the case for voting against the war this week, but those in favour have at least as many hard questions to answer. Before the Iraq war, there was nothing like enough discussion about what was going to happen after the fighting or civilian casualties during it. Let's hope this time we don't make the same mistake again. I'm joined shortly by the Defence Secretary, Michael Fallon, who has been out there making the case, including we're here, to Labour MPs as well as his own. Mr Fallon, can I welcome you and ask you, first of all, have you been talking to Labour MPs directly this week?
Yes, we've been talking to Labour MPs all week. We've been giving them briefing, trying to answer some of the very legitimate questions they've been asking. In fact, you heard some of them from Jeremy Corbyn a few minutes ago about what more can be done to stop the supply of oil or arms or money to ISIL. We've been briefing them in the Ministry of Defence and I've been talking to them in Parliament.
In your waters, do you think we're going to see a vote this week?
Well, we'd like to have a vote for military action, but we've got to keep building the case. The Prime Minister advanced the case in Parliament on Thursday. He answered questions for 2.5 hours from over 100 MPs. And you could see opinion beginning to shift. This is ongoing.
Do you think you've got the votes?
Well, we're working,
yet?
Not yet. We're working at it, and we need to keep working at it, because there are lots of questions about this. You shouldn't extend military operations lightly. There are legitimate questions to answer, and we're doing our best to answer them.
If you called the vote, and to general surprise, Jeremy Corbyn and his side won that vote, what would the effect be?
Well, that would be hugely damaging, obviously, to Britain's reputation across the world. It's our allies who want us to come and help. France has asked us very directly to send the RAF to help alongside French aircraft. It would obviously damage our reputation internationally, and I honestly believe it would leave us less safe than we are at the moment.
But as we heard, he hasn't decided yet whether to whip Labour MPs, in his view, against the strikes, or maybe he has decided, he just doesn't want to tell us yet. But if he whipped the Labour Party against you, would that stop the vote taking place?
Well, this isn't just a matter for the Labour Party, or actually even the Conservative Party. This is a matter on which individual MPs have to make up their minds. They've been asking questions. We're doing our best to answer them, to explain that France wants us to help. The United Nations has passed the resolution that there are strong military reasons for using our aircraft in this battle. We're making these arguments, and I hope MPs will look at them individually.
I don't want to get too hung up on the processology of all of this, because actually it's the fundamental question that matters most of all. You'll have seen possibly in The Observer people who are living in Raqqa now saying, for goodness sake, don't bomb us, because there's 150,000 people or so in Raqqa, of whom a few thousand will be bad guys or terrorists and their accomplices. They, according to journalists who've been in Raqqa, go straight underground into bunkers, or they disperse amongst the civilian population to schools and houses and other places, using the civilians there as human shields. So if we vote to bomb Raqqa, we are voting to kill large numbers of innocent people in Raqqa.
Absolutely not. We set very strict rules of engagement to minimise civilian casualties, and this is actually why the coalition and why the French would like the RAF involved, because we have the precision strike fighters that can take out very particular targets, the command posts, the key personnel, the training camps, the people who are plotting against this country and outrages elsewhere in Europe. They can be taken out very precisely. Let me put the...
Can they really?
Absolutely.
We've got these brimstone missiles. They can't go into underground bunkers, can they?
No, but they can take out...
They can't distinguish between an ISIL supporter and somebody wearing a headscarf along the road selling shoes.
Absolutely. We build up intelligence on all the targets. The targets are individually selected. They're approved. I have to approve any deliberate target that's chosen. The commanders last week had around 25 aircraft available with precision strike capability. 8 of those were British Tornadoes. That's a third of them. Of the unmanned aircraft flying in the region at the moment, about a quarter are British. So we have a very large proportion of high precision strike capability, and that's why the French have specifically asked us to help, and why the coalition would welcome the RAF participating. We're already doing that in Iraq.
And these bombs can find their way into bunkers and so forth, can't they?
The RAF have been striking with the permission of Parliament in Iraq for over a year now, And our estimate is there hasn't yet been a single civilian casualty because of the precision of their strikes. They have been carefully targeted at ISIL command posts, ISIL supplies, ISIL supply routes.
With the greatest respect, that reminds me slightly of Robin Cook's notorious comment about going into Afghanistan and not a shot being fired at the beginning of that war. We have had the war in Iraq, which has been a catastrophe. It killed huge numbers of people, which you supported. We've had the war in Libya, which has been a total catastrophe, destroyed that country and opened up migrant routes into Europe, which you supported. And now you're coming back to the British people and saying, let's try a third time.
No, we've already got permission to deal with ISIL in Iraq at the edges, helping the Iraqi government push back ISIL. But it makes no sense simply to be dealing with ISIL in Iraq when ISIL is headquartered in northeast Syria. Now, ISIL is not just a threat to Iraq and Syria. ISIL is a very direct threat to this country.
I absolutely understand that.
Let me put it this way. Last year, there were 15 ISIL-related attacks worldwide. This year, there have already been 150 attacks, and we've seen them recently, not just in Ankara, in Beirut, we've now seen the slaughter in Paris. There is a very direct threat to this country from letting ISIL continue unchecked.
There's been briefing that British supermarkets and stuff might be targeted by ISIL. Is that just supposition, or is there hard evidence for that?
Well, we've had 7 plots, very direct plots, against the streets of Britain already being foiled by our security forces so far, but the current independent threat assessment is that an attack on Britain is now highly likely. We have to do something about that. Of course, Labour is right to say there should be a political process to end the civil war in Syria and give it a better government. Of course, they're right to say we should look at the oil and financing of ISIL, but we also have to defend ourselves. We have to deal here with a very direct threat to this country.
Jeremy Corbyn, and a lot of people agree with him, say that the thing is, if we actually start to bomb in Raqqa, we start to bomb ISIL in northern Syria, we will make it much likelier that they come and attack us here.
Well, it's too late now. We're already a target. ISIL already regard Britain as one of their top targets. They're already plotting against this country. We're attacking ISIL already in Iraq. We are part of this fight. And let's be clear here. France has asked for our help. The United Nations has passed a resolution calling on all members of the United Nations to use their capacities to eradicate any safe haven for ISIL. That is a United Nations resolution. But we also need to do this to keep our own country safe.
Now, the Prime Minister talked about there being 70,000 potential fighters in Syria at the moment. Jeremy Corbyn's just said he has deep scepticism about that figure. Do you know who these people are? Are they actually moderates, or are they other forms of extremists in the wrong parts of Syria, which is what people suggest?
Yes, we do know who they are, and this is an independent Joint Intelligence Committee assessment. It's not ministers making this figure. It's their assessment, and it's supported by academics. There's the Free Syrian Army, commanded by General Idris in the north. There's the Southern Front, al-Zubi in the south. There aren't many of these people standing up to both Assad and ISIL. And the longer we wait, by the way, the fewer there will be. But with the best estimate of those who are not extremists, who are prepared to support a new government in Syria and are then prepared to take the fight to ISIL, is around 70,000. Now, they're not a new model army, all perfectly drilled and organised outside the gates of Raqqa.
A lot of them are in the wrong part of Syria as well, aren't they?
They've been fighting Assad and ISIL in different parts of Syria. There are different factions, but they are there, and there will be fewer of them if we don't start getting involved properly in dealing with ISIL in its headquarters.
This takes us right on, however, to the biggest question of all, which is, in 2013 there was a vote in the House of Commons which the government lost, but that was to attack Assad, who is now, objectively as it were, our ally in all of this. Assad's army are going to be on the same side as us, whatever we do in there. So what happens if somehow we, inverted commas, win? What happens if we do take ground, or the Free Syrian Army takes ground from Raqqa, from ISIL, and takes Raqqa, and we all move in there? Assad attacks them.
Well, first of all, that was a vote to stop Assad using chemical weapons against his own people. And look what's happened since. We've had 250,000 people in Syria killed. We've had 11 million people displaced. 4 million people have left Syria.
And he's stronger than ever.
No, he is not stronger than ever. He's only in control of a quarter of his country. But we've had, this huge civil war in Syria, and we need to bring it to an end. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't be dealing with ISIL first. ISIL is the threat, not just to both countries, Iraq and Syria, but to us here in Western Europe as well.
We've got, I mean, I said that Assad was in a powerful position. He's got the Russian bear at his shoulder, which helps a great deal. If ISIL are defeated, with our help, and the Americans' help, and the Russians' help, Assad will be stronger still. And if the Free Syrian Army go into Raqqa, presumably the Russians will attack them. I mean, have there been conversations about what happens?
Well, first of all, what has changed now is that all the parties involved, the close neighbours like Iran and Saudi Arabia and Russia, which has huge influence in Syria, are now involved in a political process. That wasn't true last year, and it wasn't true 2 years ago. They're all now working together on a new type of government for Syria that can be genuinely comprehensive, include all groups in Syria, Alawite, Christian, Sunni and Druze, and build a more comprehensive government in Syria that is moderate. Now, Russia is part of that process. It's underway in Vienna. Philip Hammond is representing Great Britain as part of that negotiation, and that is a sign of optimism. But we can't wait for that process to work its way through without dealing with the terrorist threat from ISIL to our own country.
That surely is the heart of this problem. That on the one hand you want to act now. On the other hand, those people who say it's very, very dangerous to act until we have a comprehensive idea of what's going to happen next. Then have to wait for the Russians to change their mind about Assad, and there is no sign of that happening.
Well, our argument is that it's pretty dangerous not to act when you see a very direct threat to this country, when you're asked for help by France, when the United Nations requests all its members to assist, when you have the capability, the precision strike aircraft that could deal with this death cult in its headquarters in Raqqa, it's even more dangerous not to do something about it. What happened in Paris a couple of weeks ago could happen in a British city. Innocent people slaughtered on a night out. ISIL is not making, by the way, not making demands. It's not holding people hostage. These are terrorists who are prepared to go in and slaughter people with automatic weapons and then blow themselves up. This is a death cult.
I absolutely understand that.
Well, I hope you do, because we have to do something about this.
My question is whether, in doing something about this, we actually trigger a whole series of further wars and conflicts in that region and make things worse.
Well, there is a war going on in Syria at the moment that's gone on for over 4 years, and hundreds of thousands of lives have already been lost. In Iraq, we're helping the legitimate government of Iraq push ISIL back, and that is beginning to happen. But the headquarters of ISIL is there in northeast Syria, and we have the capacity to help France and our allies do something about it. So the bigger question is, why would we not help?
Two specifics. Have we actually had a conversation with the Russians about the end game?
Yes, the Russians are involved in these negotiations now, and that's the most encouraging thing over the last few months. They're involved actively with Saudi Arabia, with Iran, with Turkey, and with the various moderates in Syria to give Syria a better government.
And second, as Defence Secretary, what assurance can you offer that we won't have an RAF jet shot down by the Russians or the Turks following their ghastly incident at the beginning of last week?
Well, the Turks, as we understand it, were defending their own airspace against a Russian incursion.
But it's a very crowded airspace, lots of missiles and planes hurtling all over the place.
There is already a memorandum of understanding between the coalition and the Russians for aircraft operating in the area around Raqqa. We would then be party to that, and our planes are already equipped with defensive aids. There are always risks in war, but there is a greater risk from not doing something about ISIL and leaving our streets vulnerable to the kind of slaughter we saw in Paris.
OK, if I may, one domestic issue which is causing a lot of concern for the Conservative Party at the moment is this sort of scandal over the so-called Tatler Tory. He's now left the party. Grant Shapps has resigned. There are calls for Lord Feldman to resign. What's your message, first of all, to the parents of Luke Johnson, who killed himself?
Well, deepest sympathy. It's appalling that anybody should have to take their life in the particular way that Elliot Johnson did. I would assure his parents that there is now a full-scale investigation going on, led by a very senior lawyer from Clifford Chance, and of course there'll be the coroner's inquest as well. But the person directly responsible for Central Office, for campaigning, the chairman, Grant Shapps, who signed up Mark Clark's operation, he has accepted responsibility, and yesterday he resigned.
Do you think Lord Feldman should go as well?
Well, it was Grant Shapps who was in charge of campaigning and who was involved in this, and I think it's best now to see where the investigation takes us.
The family would like, as you know, an independent inquiry because they think the lawyer involved, I think he wants to be a Conservative MP himself and so forth, that he should be completely independent of the party.
Oh, he is. He's fully independent. This is a very senior lawyer from one of the top law firms in the country.
Overall, you've been inside the Conservative Party for a very long time. What goes wrong with the Conservative youth wing?
Well, you know, it's trivial, I think, to say that they get over-enthusiastic and overzealous when somebody has done something as sad as to take their own life. But let me just assure you, this is all going to be fully investigated and we will all see what the facts are.
Michael Fallon, thank you very much for joining us this morning.
I've been getting away with it.